Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we journey into the forgotten corners of Pennsylvania, through isolated small towns buried beneath endless forests and decaying roads, where the past refuses to stay buried and places exist where help does not reach. Here, 7 of the most disturbing, real, and terrifying true horror stories have emerged, accounts that continue to haunt those who survived them. These are not legends or campfire tales. These are real documented encounters from ordinary people who found themselves face to face with something they were never meant to see. From abandoned farmhouses hiding secrets, to basements that were never meant to be opened. From disappearances that defy explanation to things moving in the woods that should not exist. Tonight, you will hear horrors that linger long after the lights go out. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Pennsylvania, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Ethan Keller, and this happened to me in the fall of 2016. When I was 27 years old and desperate for a fresh start. After my divorce, I took a job as a night maintenance supervisor in a small Pennsylvania town so insignificant it barely showed up on a map. The locals called it quiet. Too quiet in hindsight. The house came with the job. An old 2-story colonial on the edge of town, surrounded by dead cornfields and a narrow road that disappeared into the woods. The rent was cheap, the space was large, and I didn't ask questions. That was my first mistake. The first week passed uneventfully. The second week, the phone started ringing. There was a landline mounted on the kitchen wall, yellowed with age. It rang only after midnight. Every time I answered, there was nothing. No breathing, no static. Just silence heavy enough to feel intentional. I assumed it was faulty wiring. Old house, old town. But on the 7th night, when I checked the call log, I saw something that made my stomach turn. Every call was coming from inside the house. The next night, I unplugged the phone. At exactly 12:14 a.m., it rang anyway. The sound echoed through the house. Sharp, metallic, wrong. I stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the kitchen doorway as the ringing continued, steady and patient, like it knew I was listening. I didn't answer at that time. The following morning, I asked my neighbor, an older man named Raymond, about the phone lines. He went pale the moment I mentioned the ringing. "You shouldn't have moved in there," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. "That house don't like new voices." Raymond told me the house used to belong to a switchboard operator named Martha Holland, who worked nights back in the 1960s. When the phone company shut down the local exchange, she was fired. 2 weeks later, neighbors reported constant ringing from the house. Then one night, it stopped. They found her dead beside the kitchen phone, the receiver torn from the wall, her fingers blackened as if burned from the inside out. That night, when the phone rang again, I finally answered. And this time, someone whispered my name. I dropped the receiver like it had burned me. The ringing stopped immediately, leaving the house unnaturally silent. I stood there for a long time, staring at the phone as if it might start screaming instead. My name hadn't been whispered like a guess. It was spoken with familiarity. Slow, deliberate, almost affectionate. That night, I didn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards felt closer than it should have. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps above me, slow and dragging, even though I lived alone. I convinced myself it was the house settling, but the rhythm was wrong. Too intentional. The next day at work, I tried to focus. but the house followed me in my thoughts. I searched county records during my lunch break and found something Raymond hadn't mentioned. After Martha Holland died, 3 tenants lived in that house over the next decade. All 3 moved out suddenly. All 3 reported receiving phone calls from inside the house, and all 3 disappeared within 6 months. That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time since moving in. At 12:14 a.m., the phone rang again. Then it rang upstairs, right outside my bedroom door. The ringing outside my door didn't come from a phone I could see. It was muffled, distorted, as if coming through the walls themselves. I sat frozen on my bed, clutching my phone with shaking hands, debating whether to call the police or run. Then, the ringing stopped. A soft knock replaced it. "Ethan," a woman's voice said, right outside the door. Calm, familiar. "You forgot to answer." I pressed my hand over my mouth to stop myself from responding. The voice sighed, disappointed, and slowly dragged away down the hallway. Floorboards creaked with every step, growing fainter until silence returned. The next morning, I found the upstairs hallway phone mounted to the wall. It hadn't been there before. The cord was frayed, the plastic cracked, and the number pad was stained dark, as if handled by burned fingers. I ripped it from the wall and threw it into my truck, dumping it at the landfill after work. That night, the house rang anyway. This time, every phone rang at once. Kitchen, hallway, bedroom. An overwhelming chorus that vibrated the walls. And through it all, I heard Martha laughing. She was happy I finally understood. By the 5th night, after hearing Martha laugh, I was no longer pretending this was just stress or imagination. The house had patterns. The ringing always started softly, like a test, before growing louder, as if gauging how afraid I was. I stopped answering entirely, hoping silence might starve whatever lingered there. Instead, the calls became personal. Voicemails appeared on my cell phone from unknown numbers, each timestamped at 12:14 a.m. The messages contained sounds I couldn't explain, breathing, distant static, and sometimes the faint clicking of an old switchboard. Then came voices, not just Martha's. I heard Raymond, I heard co-workers, I even heard my ex-wife crying, begging me to pick up. That broke me. I confronted Raymond the next morning. He finally told me the truth. Martha didn't just work phones, she believed the lines were alive. She thought calls connected souls, not people. When she died, the town quietly rerouted unused lines through her house to save money. People who answered long enough stayed connected. That night, the ringing didn't stop. It waited. At 12:13 a.m., I stood in the kitchen holding the receiver. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't. I decided I wouldn't run. I wouldn't ignore it. I would end it, whatever it was. When the phone rang, the sound felt almost relieved, like it had been waiting for permission. I answered. The kitchen vanished. I was no longer standing in my house, but inside a vast, dark space filled with floating wires, endless cords stretching into nothing. Voices echoed from every direction, hundreds of them, some whispering, some screaming, some laughing softly like Martha had. She appeared in front of me, her face flickering like bad reception, eyes burned black. "You listened," she said warmly. "Now you belong." I felt something pulling at my chest, threading through my ribs like cable. I screamed and slammed the receiver down with everything I had. I woke up on the kitchen floor at dawn. The phone was gone. The house was silent. For the first time, I believed it was over. I was wrong. The silence after that night was worse than the ringing. Days passed without a single sound from the phone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed inside me. At random moments, my ears would ring softly, like a distant dial tone only I could hear. When I slept, I dreamed of cords tightening around my wrists, gently pulling me toward a place I couldn't see. People started acting strange around me. Raymond stopped answering his door. At work, co-workers avoided eye contact, whispering when I walked by. One afternoon, my supervisor asked if I'd been making calls from the maintenance office late at night. He showed me the phone records. Calls were being placed at 12:14 a.m. from my employee ID. I hadn't been there. That evening, I returned home to find the kitchen phone mounted back on the wall, polished and new-looking, like it had never been removed. The receiver rested neatly in place. It wasn't ringing. It was waiting. And for the first time, I felt an overwhelming urge to pick it up. I started losing time. I'd sit down on the couch in the evening, and suddenly it would be morning. My phone showed outgoing calls I didn't remember making, all lasting exactly 1 minute and 14 seconds. The numbers led nowhere, disconnected or non-existent. The dreams grew clearer. I saw myself standing in that endless wire-filled darkness, calmly answering calls, connecting voices to cords, threading people into the system. Martha stood beside me, proud. "You're better than I was," she told me. "They listened to you." The final straw came when I heard my own voice on a voicemail. It was calm, reassuring, and completely empty of emotion. I was telling someone not to be afraid, that it would only hurt for a moment. That night, I packed a bag and tried to leave. As I reached the front door, the house rang. Every phone, at once. And I realized something horrifying. The calls weren't coming from the house anymore. They were coming from me. I don't remember sitting down at the kitchen table, but that's where I found myself. The phone was already in my hand. The receiver felt warm, almost alive, pulsing faintly against my palm like a heartbeat. I knew I shouldn't answer it, yet my fingers tightened on their own. When I lifted it to my ear, there was no ringing anymore, only listening. I heard voices pouring through me instead of into me. Fear, confusion, last words spoken by strangers who didn't know they were about to disappear. I felt their panic like electricity in my veins. Each call left something behind, a residue that made it harder to tell where they ended and I began. Martha stood across from me, clearer than ever, no longer flickering. She looked relieved. "You finally understand," she said softly. "Someone has to stay awake so the lines don't go dead." I realized then that the house was never haunted. It was a station, and it needed an operator. When the receiver slipped from my hand, I felt something tear away inside me, like a cord unplugged too violently. I screamed, not in pain, but in loss. The phone rang again, and I answered without hesitation. They found the house empty 2 weeks later. No signs of a struggle, no furniture missing. Just the phones, every single one, removed from the walls and stacked neatly in the kitchen like offerings. Raymond was the one who called the police, though he swore he hadn't spoken to me in days. Officially, I vanished. Unofficially, the town changed its phone system again. Lines stopped dropping, calls connected faster. Emergency dispatchers said the static was gone, replaced by perfect clarity. Sometimes, late at night, Raymond says his phone rings at 12:14 a.m. When he answers, he hears my voice. I tell him everything is fine, that help is on the line, that he just needs to stay calm and listen. Because someone still lives in that house. Someone still answers the calls. And if your phone ever rings after midnight, from a number you don't recognize. Don't ignore it. You never know who's listening on the other end. My name is Caleb Morris, and this happened to me in the winter of 2014, when my car broke down in a rural Pennsylvania town I had never heard of before, and wish I never had. I was driving home from a freelance job, cutting through back roads to save time, when my engine died without warning just as the sun began to sink behind the hills. The town sign was old and rusted, half hidden by weeds. One word stood out clearly: Hollow Creek. At first glance, the place looked normal. Modest houses, a diner, a gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. But there was something deeply wrong with the timing of everything. As the sun dipped lower, people began rushing indoors. Shops closed early, curtains snapped shut. Doors were locked with urgency, not routine. I pulled into the gas station just as the attendant was closing up. He refused to let me stay inside. "You need to be gone before dark," he said, voice shaking. "If you can't leave, don't open your door tonight, no matter who knocks." I laughed nervously. He didn't. My phone had no signal. The gas station pumps were locked. The diner lights went dark, one by one. Within minutes, the town felt abandoned, like I'd arrived after an evacuation I was never warned about. I slept in my car, wrapped in my jacket, engine dead, breath fogging the windows. At exactly sunset, a siren wailed once from somewhere deep in town. Not loud, just enough to be heard. Then everything went silent. Around 9 p.m., I noticed movement. Shapes passed between houses, slow and deliberate. Not people walking, more like shadows sliding along walls. I told myself it was paranoia until something knocked on my driver's side window. 3 slow taps. I froze. A woman's voice followed, soft and trembling. "Please, help me. They locked me out." I reached for the door handle before remembering the attendant's warning. My heart hammered as I stayed still. The voice grew closer to the glass, calmer now. "Caleb," it whispered. I had never told anyone my name. The knocking stopped. Footsteps retreated. And from somewhere behind the houses, something else began to move. Something heavy. I stayed awake the entire night, barely breathing, afraid that even the sound of my own fear might give me away. Every few minutes, something passed by my car. I could feel it more than see it. A pressure in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. Once, the car rocked gently, as if someone leaned their weight against it, testing me. Just before dawn, I heard arguing. Real voices this time. Human. When the sun finally rose, Hollow Creek came back to life, as if nothing had happened. Doors opened. People stepped outside. A man jogged past my car, headphones in, completely unaware of the terror that had surrounded me hours earlier. I got out of the car and confronted the gas station attendant. He looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept in years. "They didn't get you?" he asked quietly. I demanded answers. He hesitated, then told me the rule everyone in town followed without question. No one stays outside after sundown. Those who did weren't always themselves when morning came. Before I could ask more, a woman screamed from down the street. Someone hadn't made it inside. The crowd gathered near an abandoned house at the edge of town. On the porch sat a man I hadn't seen before, rocking back and forth, mumbling to himself. His clothes were torn, his feet were bare, blackened with dirt and something darker. When he looked up, I nearly vomited. His eyes were wrong, too reflective, like an animal caught in headlights. He smiled, but his face didn't move correctly. as if the muscles weren't used to human expressions anymore. "That's Eli," someone whispered behind me. "He missed curfew." Eli's gaze locked onto mine, and for a brief moment, something behind his eyes shifted. He looked terrified. Then it was gone, replaced by hunger. The sheriff arrived and ushered everyone away. As people dispersed, the gas station attendant pulled me aside. "They don't kill you," he said. "They wear you out, night after night, until you let them in." I asked what they were. He shook his head. "Doesn't matter. You broke down here for a reason." That night, my car was still dead, and the sun was already setting again. By late afternoon, the town felt tense again, like a breath being held. People finished errands quickly, eyes constantly checking the sky. Children were called indoors early. The diner closed before I could even sit down. No one spoke about what happened to Eli, but everyone avoided the street where he'd been found. I spent the day trying to fix my car. The engine looked fine, no blown hoses, no dead battery. It was as if something had simply decided it shouldn't run. The gas station attendant, whose name I learned was Frank, watched me from across the road. "They don't like it when people try to leave," he said quietly, "especially after the first night." I asked why the town didn't just move away. Frank laughed bitterly. "We tried. Roads lead back here. Engines fail. People forget why they were leaving." As sunset approached, Frank pressed a set of old keys into my hand. "Basement of the diner," he said. "Steel door, no windows. If they knock, don't answer." At 6:47 p.m., the siren wailed again. I ran. The diner basement smelled like oil, mold, and old fear. I locked the steel door behind me and sat on the concrete floor, clutching my phone like a lifeline. There was no signal, but it made me feel less alone. At first, nothing happened. Then the knocking started, not frantic, not loud, polite. "Hello?" a man called from upstairs. "Is anyone there?" I stayed silent. The footsteps moved slowly across the diner floor, stopping directly above me. I could hear breathing through the vents, slow, controlled, patient. Then the voice changed. It became layered, as if several people were speaking at once. The words overlapped, slipping in and out of sync. "We just want to talk," it said. "You don't belong down there." I squeezed my eyes shut as something heavy dragged across the floor above, nails scraping tile. The knocking turned into pounding, the steel door shuddering with each impact. Just when I thought it would give way, everything stopped. Outside, the siren wailed again. It wasn't sunrise yet. I must have blacked out at some point, because the next thing I remember was light seeping through the basement vents. Morning had come. The pounding, the voices, the scratching, gone. When I unlocked the steel door and stepped upstairs, the diner looked untouched, as if nothing had happened. Frank was waiting outside. "You made it," he said, relief flashing across his face for just a second. "That means they didn't mark you completely." I asked him what that meant, and for the first time, he told me the truth. Hollow Creek wasn't being hunted. It was feeding something older than the town itself. The people didn't lock their doors to keep monsters out. They locked them to keep the chosen ones in. Every few years, someone passing through would be selected. The town would subtly trap them, cars breaking down, phones dying, memories blurring, until the night came when they either gave in or became like Eli. "You leave," Frank said firmly, "or you replace us." As if on cue, my car engine started on the first try. But the sun was already lowering again. I didn't wait. I threw my bag into the car and drove without looking back. The road out of Hollow Creek twisted through dense forest, the trees closing in tighter the farther I went. My GPS spun uselessly, recalculating again and again, insisting I make a U-turn. The sun dipped below the horizon faster than it should have. The siren wailed behind me. The engine sputtered. My headlights flickered, illuminating figures standing just beyond the tree line, too still, too tall, their eyes reflecting white like Eli's had. One of them stepped closer, and I recognized the face. It was me. Same jacket, same terrified expression. It smiled and raised a hand, as if inviting me to stop. I slammed the accelerator, screaming, forcing the car forward as the road suddenly straightened. Lights appeared ahead, a highway sign, civilization. The siren cut off abruptly. I crossed the county line just as darkness fully fell. In my rearview mirror, the forest swallowed the road behind me, and Hollow Creek vanished. Weeks later, I tried to tell people about Hollow Creek. Friends laughed, co-workers joked, even my parents thought I'd imagined it, exhausted and scared after being stranded in the cold. But I knew the truth. Every night I dreamt of the siren, the pounding, the voices, and that version of me standing silently at the tree line. I woke drenched in sweat, heart hammering, certain that somewhere in a forest I'd never seen, my other self was waiting. It wasn't just a dream. One night, my phone rang. No caller ID. A voice, layered and distorted, whispered my name. I froze. It was calm, almost polite, yet I could hear the faint echo of those forest figures behind it. "You didn't stay," the voice said. "Good. Not yet." I hung up immediately, but the unease didn't leave. The trees outside my house seemed darker, heavier. Shadows twisted at the corners of my vision. Every siren in town that night made my stomach drop. Hollow Creek had let me go once, but it had remembered my name. It had noticed me, and I knew it would call again. I never went near that road again. Hollow Creek isn't on most maps, and locals don't mention it. Yet every time I hear a siren in the distance or a car engine die for no reason, my stomach knots, and I remember the sound of footsteps across the diner floor. I know now that some towns aren't abandoned for a reason. They're waiting for someone careless, someone curious, someone unlucky enough to break the rules. And the rules are simple. Be inside by sundown and never answer when they call. Sometimes, late at night, I wake to my phone ringing again. Unknown number, 12:14 a.m., the same as in Hollow Creek. I don't answer, I never will. But I can hear them, just faintly listening. And I know that if I ever drive down a back road late at night in Pennsylvania, there are towns that will notice, towns that remember names, and they will call. My name is Lydia Grant, and this happened to me in the spring of 2017, when I had just moved to Millersville, Pennsylvania, for my new job as a local archivist. I loved history, old buildings, cemeteries, places that held secrets. But nothing in my experience prepared me for what I would find in the Millersville Cemetery. It started with a routine survey. The cemetery had been around since the 1800s, overgrown in sections, tombstones leaning like tired soldiers. On my first night walking through it, I noticed shadows moving against the gravestones. Not the usual night shadows that stretch and shift. They moved with purpose, dodging moonlight, shifting just beyond the corner of my eye. I told myself it was fatigue, the stress of the new job, maybe just tricks of my head. But when I returned the next night, the same shadows appeared. Always at exactly 11:11 p.m., lingering near the older graves, never leaving, no matter how much I shined my flashlight. By the third night, I could feel them watching me, whispering through the wind, almost forming words. That's when I realized Millersville Cemetery was far from quiet and far from empty. The third night, I brought my camera to document what I thought might be simple optical illusions. As I walked down the cracked stone paths, I heard soft footsteps behind me, crunching on gravel. Every time I turned, there was nothing. But the air felt thick, like someone had been brushing past my shoulders. I stopped near a family plot, one of the oldest in the cemetery, surrounded by a wrought iron fence rusted with age. The shadows gathered closer here. My flashlight flickered, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw figures crouching beside the stones, watching me. A cold wind rushed past my neck, carrying whispers I couldn't fully catch. The name Lydia drifted through, soft and deliberate. I spun around. Nothing. The cemetery was silent. I tried to leave, but every path seemed unfamiliar. The gates I had entered through were gone, replaced by endless rows of graves stretching farther than I remembered. Panic set in as I realized the shadows weren't following the paths. They were shaping them. And then I heard laughter. Quiet, childish, echoing from somewhere deep in the cemetery, bouncing between the headstones. I ran. My flashlight bounced wildly across the cracked paths, illuminating rows of old gravestones that seemed to stretch endlessly. The laughter followed me, soft at first, then louder, almost taunting. My legs burned, and every step felt heavier, as if the shadows themselves were pressing down on me. I stumbled over a root and fell hard, scraping my hands and knees on the gravel. When I looked up, the shadows were all around me, not moving like people, but shaping the air itself. Dark, writhing forms that stretched and twisted unnaturally. I tried calling for help, but my voice came out choked and distorted, swallowed by the night. Then I saw her. A young girl, pale and thin, standing among the tombstones. She didn't move, just tilted her head, watching. Her lips parted, whispering my name again. Lydia, come play. I scrambled back, my camera clattering to the ground. When I picked it up, the lens reflected the shadows in a way my eyes couldn't perceive. Figures hiding just beyond the grave markers, surrounding me completely. I realized something terrifying. They didn't want me to leave. They wanted me to join them. I scrambled to my feet and ran toward where I thought the cemetery gates had been. But the layout had changed. Paths twisted, headstones seemed to shift as I passed, blocking any clear exit. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, the shadows were closer, darker, moving faster. Then I heard a whisper, soft but unmistakable. Lydia, you can stay, forever. The voice wasn't coming from one direction. It surrounded me. Coming from the ground, the trees, even the sky. My flashlight flickered violently, and for a second, the shadows formed faces, dozens of them, grinning, eyes hollow and endless. I tripped again, sliding down a moss-covered slope into a section of the cemetery I hadn't seen before. The ground was littered with tiny, broken toys, old dolls missing eyes, and small shoes half buried in dirt. The girl was there again, holding a cracked porcelain doll in her tiny hands. She lifted it toward me, silent but insistent. I screamed and turned to run, but the shadows stretched between me and the exit, black walls forming out of nothing. Panic clawed at my chest. I realized this night wasn't going to end easily. I forced myself to stand and run again, pushing through the fog and the twisted shadows. Every step felt like wading through thick air. The girl and the shadows followed, always just at the edge of my vision. The cemetery seemed endless, with headstones forming a labyrinth that rearranged itself the moment I tried to escape. Then I heard it, a deep, resonant hum vibrating through the ground. The shadows paused, as if listening. The girl stepped forward, her cracked doll held higher. She whispered, "They want you." And suddenly, the gravestones around her began to shift, tilting and grinding as if waking from a long sleep. I ran toward what I hoped was the entrance, but the earth beneath me trembled. Roots shot up, wrapping around my ankles, slowing me. I fought them off with fists and elbows, heart hammering, lungs burning. The shadows pressed closer, black tendrils stretching toward me, intangible yet suffocating. I glimpsed a faint light in the distance, my only hope. With every ounce of strength, I wrenched free from the roots and sprinted toward it, feeling the presence of hundreds of unseen eyes burning into my back. The exit was close. I could almost taste the air beyond the cemetery walls. I reached the faint glow. It was the street lamp outside the cemetery gates. Relief surged through me, and I bolted toward it, ignoring the sting of scraped hands and knees. The shadows surged after me, faster, darker, whispering in unison. "Stay. Lydia. Stay." As I reached the iron gates, they slammed shut with a thunderous clang, though no one touched them. My chest heaved as I pounded on the metal, screaming for someone, anyone, to help me. Behind the gates, the cemetery stretched infinitely, gravestones and fog shifting as if alive. The girl appeared again, stepping forward, small hand outstretched. She tilted her head, smiling, eyes hollow and unblinking. A strange calm washed over me. I understood they weren't trying to kill me. They wanted acknowledgement. Fear wasn't enough. Resistance was a game. I pushed the gates with all my strength, finally forcing them open. I didn't look back. The shadows didn't follow. When I reached my car, I realized the street lamp's light barely reached the cemetery entrance. And yet, in the rearview mirror, I saw the girl standing just inside the fog, watching. Her smile lingered as I drove away. I thought I had escaped, but the nightmares began almost immediately. Each night, I saw Millersville Cemetery in my dreams, exactly as it had been, the twisting paths, the fog, the shadows creeping silently. But this time, they were inside me. I would wake to find dark shapes in the corners of my bedroom, twisting just beyond the light of my lamp. I returned to my apartment with friends, but their voices sounded distant, muffled, as though traveling through heavy fog. I would see fleeting glimpses of the girl in reflections, in windows, in mirrors. Every reflective surface became a portal, showing me the cemetery, always at 11:11 p.m., always with her waiting. One night, I woke to a whisper in my ear, soft, deliberate. "You came back. Good. You understand now." I spun around. No one was there. But the air was thick, cold, and moving. My reflection in the mirror was wrong, slightly off, darker around the eyes. I realized that part of me had stayed behind, trapped in the cemetery's labyrinth of shadows. The terror wasn't over. It had followed me home. The days became unbearable. I couldn't go outside after dark. Every clock ticked toward 11:11 p.m., and the shadows grew stronger in my peripheral vision. One evening, I tried to leave the house, but the streets seemed twisted, unfamiliar. Signs changed mid-step, buildings shifted, and every alley looked like the cemetery paths I had run through. I began to hear the whispers constantly, even during the day. "Stay, Lydia. Come play." They were layered, overlapping, impossible to ignore. My phone rang at exactly 11:11 each night, showing no caller ID. When I answered, only a low, hollow hum filled my ears. I would hang up, but the voice followed me, everywhere I went. I knew that Hollow Creek wasn't the only place these shadows existed. Millersville Cemetery had opened a doorway, and now they were free to follow me, lingering in the edges of reality. The girl's smile haunted me constantly. She didn't need to chase me anymore. She only had to wait. And I had learned the truth too late. Some places, some shadows, never let go. It wasn't until weeks later that I realized the full extent of what had happened. I tried talking to a local historian about Millersville Cemetery, hoping to find some logical explanation. She looked at me with hollow eyes and said only, "Some graves aren't for the dead. They're for those who wander too far." That night, I dreamt of the cemetery again. This time, the shadows didn't chase me. They circled me, whispering, circling like vultures. The girl stepped forward, holding out her cracked doll, smiling. "You see now," she said, "you can't leave entirely." I woke with a cold hand brushing my arm. The air was still, but I could feel the weight of hundreds of unseen eyes. My reflection in the mirror wasn't just wrong. It moved independently, staring back with a faint smile I did not feel. I understood then. They had marked me. Part of me would always remain with the cemetery, tethered to that labyrinth of shadows and twisted paths. No matter where I went, it would follow, patiently waiting for nights when the air grew cold and the fog rolled in. The terror wasn't over. It had become a permanent part of my life. Even now, years later, I can feel it. The faint brush of shadows in the corner of my vision, the whisper of my name carried on the wind. I never set foot near Millersville Cemetery again, but I know it didn't let me go. It only waits. Some nights, my phone rings at 11:11 p.m. No caller ID. I don't answer, but I can hear faint laughter through the line. The girl, the shadows, the labyrinth itself. They are patient. I can feel their eyes on me when I walk at night, in stores, through parks. They have learned my habits, my routines. They don't need to chase me anymore. And I know deep down that one day I might wander too far. The shadows will be there, waiting at the edges of every path, twisting reality around me. And when that day comes, they will guide me back to the cemetery, where the air moves on its own, the paths never end, and the girl will be waiting with her cracked doll, smiling. I have learned my lesson. Some places are not meant to be walked, some shadows are not meant to be seen, and they never forget. My name is Ethan Clark, and this happened during a weekend hiking trip in 2016. I had heard stories about Pine Hollow, Pennsylvania, mostly local legends about hikers disappearing or hearing strange voices in the dense woods. But I dismissed them as exaggerations. I loved solitude and the thrill of exploring untamed wilderness. The forest was dense, old, and silent in a way that felt unnatural. Sunlight barely reached the forest floor, creating long, twisting shadows that seemed to slither between the trees. The air smelled of damp pine and earth, but beneath that, a faint metallic tang lingered. I thought it was my imagination, until I heard the first whisper. It was soft, almost seductive, drifting from deep in the forest. "Ethan." I froze. No wind, no birds, just my name carried through the trees. I called out, but my voice sounded wrong, muffled. The whisper came again, closer this time. "Ethan, come this way." I realized with a chill that I was alone, but someone, or something, knew my name. The forest seemed to pulse around me, and every shadow I passed felt alive, watching. My instinct told me to leave, but curiosity pushed me deeper. The further I went, the quieter the forest became, as if all life had been drained away. Leaves no longer rustled, birds no longer called. The whispering grew louder, layering voices together in a chorus that felt unnatural. "Ethan, don't be afraid. Come closer." I tried to retrace my steps, but every tree looked the same. Every path twisted and turned back on itself. My compass spun wildly, useless, and my phone had no signal. Panic set in, but the whispers were calm now, coaxing, almost gentle. Then I saw movement ahead. Figures, thin, humanoid, but elongated, almost skeletal, danced between the trees. They didn't run, didn't chase. They floated, moving with the rhythm of the whispers. Their faces were indistinct, shadows wrapped over them like second skins. But I felt them staring at me, dissecting me. A voice clearer than the rest spoke. "You came alone. Perfect." The ground beneath me seemed to tremble. Roots shifted like living snakes, opening a narrow path deeper into the heart of the forest. The whispers urged me forward, relentless, hypnotic. I wanted to resist, but my legs moved without me deciding. The path twisted endlessly, but the whispers remained constant, calling my name from every direction. I tried to stop, to catch my breath, but my legs refused to listen. The forest seemed alive, each tree leaning in toward me, branches like skeletal fingers scratching at my jacket as I passed. I realized that I wasn't just being watched. I was hunted. Suddenly, I stumbled into a clearing. Moonlight pierced through the thick canopy, revealing a circle of stones, each carved with symbols I didn't recognize. The figures surrounded the clearing now, their movements synchronized, swaying like a ritual dance. Their elongated limbs creaked with unnatural sounds, scraping the stone circle in time with the whispers. A shadow detached from the rest and approached me. It was taller, darker, and more defined than the others. I could feel its presence, pressing against my chest, controlling my heartbeat. It whispered directly into my mind. "You came here willingly. Now you belong." I screamed, but the forest swallowed my sound. The whispers grew louder, feeding on my fear, twisting my thoughts. For a moment, I wondered if I had actually entered another world, one stitched together from shadows and echoes, and I was trapped inside its rhythm. I turned and ran, trying to escape the clearing. But the forest had changed. The paths I had used before had vanished, replaced by dense undergrowth and impossibly tall trees. Every step was met with resistance, as if the forest itself wanted to keep me inside. The whispers followed, now layered with laughter, guttural and alien. "You cannot leave. Ethan." The voice was everywhere, coming from the ground, the trees, and even the sky above. My flashlight flickered as I stumbled over roots and rocks, and in that brief illumination, I saw the figures in closer detail. Faces smooth, expressionless, but eyes glowing faintly white. The tallest shadow from the clearing loomed over me, its elongated arm stretching unnaturally toward me. I felt a pull, like gravity had shifted. My instincts screamed to fight, but my body felt heavy, numb, as if the forest was claiming me. I tripped into a ditch, scraping my arms and legs. As I looked up, the figures surrounded me, circling in silence, watching patiently. The whispers softened into a single, clear voice. "Welcome to Pine Hollow. You're home now." Panic surged. I realized I had no idea which way was out. I forced myself to stand, shaking and bleeding from my fall. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, but the forest seemed to warp around me. The trees leaned closer, shadows stretching unnaturally, blocking every potential path. The whispers had grown insistent, chanting my name in an eerie rhythm, as though the forest itself had become a living organism feeding on my fear. I stumbled across an ancient, fallen tree, its roots rising like jagged teeth from the forest floor. I clung to it, gasping for air, realizing I had no idea how long I'd been wandering. The figures emerged from the shadows again, moving in silence now, their glowing eyes locked on me. Each step they took didn't make a sound, yet the ground seemed to recoil under their presence. Suddenly, one of the figures lifted its head, tilting toward me. A voice, melodic but hollow, echoed in my mind. "You can resist. But resistance is part of the fun." Panic surged. I ripped myself away and ran blindly, branches scratching my face, roots tangling my shoes, the chanting growing louder, filling every corner of my consciousness. I realized then that Pine Hollow didn't want me to leave alive, but it wanted me to understand it first. I reached a clearing that I didn't remember from before. The moonlight revealed a small stream, its surface perfectly still. I stopped, trembling, listening. The whispers had transformed into a cacophony, layered voices overlapping, each calling my name, promising, warning, enticing. Then I saw it, a figure standing on the far bank of the stream. Unlike the others, it was more solid, more human in shape, but its features were obscured, blurred like a faded photograph. It raised an arm, pointing toward the darkest part of the forest. Instinct screamed to run the other way, but something compelled me to step forward. The shadows behind me shifted, moving closer, almost as if pushing me. I crossed the stream, each step feeling like wading through thick water. The figure didn't speak, but the whispers flooded my mind, guiding me, shaping my thoughts, showing visions of lost hikers, twisted forests, and endless nights. I realized with horror that Pine Hollow wasn't just a forest. It was a conscious predator, feeding on fear and curiosity. And I was now part of its story, whether I wanted to be or not. I pressed forward, heart hammering, through the thickening fog. The forest around me seemed alive. Every rustle, every creak, amplified as though whispering secrets directly into my mind. The humanoid figure on the stream bank had vanished, leaving only an oppressive silence that made my ears ring. Yet the whispers never stopped. They seeped into my thoughts, echoing promises and threats, twisting my perception of time and space. The shadows began to take form, rising from the forest floor like black smoke, solidifying into humanoid shapes. They reached out with long, skeletal fingers, but they didn't touch me. Instead, they circled me, guiding me deeper, funneling me toward a clearing I hadn't seen before. There, in the center, stood an ancient stone arch, covered in twisted roots and moss, etched with symbols that seemed to shift when I blinked. The whispers crescendoed, urging me to step through the arch. My mind screamed to run, but my body moved on its own, drawn to the arch as if by gravity. I realized then that Pine Hollow had no intention of letting me leave without understanding it completely. Resistance was futile. Submission, terrifying as it felt, was the only way to survive. I stepped under the arch, and the world seemed to shudder. The forest bent around me, shadows stretching and twisting into grotesque forms. The whispers became voices, clear and overlapping, lost hikers, screaming silently, echoing memories of fear. My mind raced with every memory I had of curiosity, of wandering off trails, of ignoring warning signs. Pine Hollow cataloged everything. The humanoid figure reappeared in the center of the clearing. This time it spoke, not with sound, but directly into my consciousness. You see now? This is how the forest remembers. Fear is fuel. Curiosity is entry. You cannot leave what you understand. I tried to run, but my body refused, paralyzed with realization. The shadows closed in, not to harm, but to teach. I saw visions. hikers trapped forever in winding paths, their faces pale and twisted, whispering for help that never came. The forest was patient, eternal, and it claimed slowly, leaving just enough hope for those trapped to learn its ways before surrendering entirely. I knew, deep in my bones, that stepping under the arch had changed me. Pine Hollow had marked me. Part of me would never leave. Days later, I found myself back home, but the world felt different. Shadows lingered in corners, subtle and waiting. My dreams were filled with the forest, the arch, and the humanoid figure's silent instructions. Every time I closed my eyes, Pine Hollow stretched before me, paths twisting endlessly, shadows reaching from the fog. I tried telling my friends, my co-workers, anyone who would listen, but they dismissed me. Stress, they said. Imagination. But I knew better. Pine Hollow didn't need to chase me. It had followed. The whispers were faint now, but I could hear them in reflections, in wind patterns, in the static of my television. One night, I awoke to a faint pressure against my chest, as if unseen hands pressed me down, guiding me. And then, I heard it clearly. "You belong, Ethan. You understand now." The realization hit me like ice. I had survived the forest physically, but part of my mind, part of my very essence, was trapped there, cataloged for eternity. Pine Hollow didn't let wanderers go. It only taught them its rules. And I had learned mine. Years have passed, but the forest never lets me forget. Every time I hear the wind in the trees, it carries whispers of my name. Every time I walk in a park or along a wooded path, I feel unseen eyes watching, cataloging. I can't resist looking at shadows. They pulse, almost alive, shaping themselves around me. I've learned to ignore them, but the knowledge is always there, gnawing at the edge of my consciousness. Pine Hollow's lesson is simple. Curiosity draws you in, fear keeps you, and understanding binds you. I survived the forest, yes, but survival doesn't mean freedom. A part of me is still wandering its paths, whispering to the lost, guiding them deeper, marking them as I was marked. And I know that one day, someone else will hear their name in the woods, drawn to explore just like I was. And when they step under the arch, the forest will remember their fear, their curiosity, and begin its patient, eternal teaching once again. I will never forget. Pine Hollow never forgets. My name is Marcus Hall, and this happened in the fall of 2018, when I was driving through rural Pennsylvania for a weekend getaway. I had heard vague warnings about Black Hollow Road. Locals muttered about a cabin that appeared and disappeared, and travelers who went looking for it sometimes never returned. But I shrugged it off as small-town superstition. The road was narrow, surrounded by thick forests that blocked almost all sunlight. The trees leaned in, their twisted branches forming archways over the asphalt. As dusk settled, the air grew unnaturally cold, and a fog rolled in from the forest floor, curling around my tires. That's when I saw it. A small cabin on the side of the road, partially obscured by fog, its windows dark. I slowed, curious. The cabin wasn't marked on my GPS, and there was no sign of power or inhabitants. Something about it felt wrong. The air seemed heavier here, carrying a faint scent of wood smoke mixed with decay. I stepped out of my car, drawn toward the porch. As soon as I did, the fog thickened, and I heard something. A faint whisper, almost like the wind, but deliberate. "Marcus, come closer." I approached the cabin slowly, my heart hammering. The wooden porch creaked under my weight, though no one was inside. The windows were dark, reflecting only the fog and the twisted trees. I reached for the door. It was slightly ajar, inviting, yet unsettling. A shiver ran down my spine as I pushed it open. Inside, the cabin was empty, but it smelled of damp wood and something more pungent, like iron and rot. Shadows clung to the corners, shifting as I moved. I noticed faint scratches on the floorboards, almost like claws. My flashlight flickered, illuminating a single chair in the center of the room, facing away from me. I took a step closer, and the chair slowly turned. Empty. But I felt it. Eyes on me. A low, guttural whisper came from the walls themselves. "You shouldn't have come." I stumbled back, my instincts screaming to leave. But when I turned toward the door, the porch was gone. Only the fog remained, stretching infinitely, swallowing the road, the trees, my car, everything. Panic rose, cold and sharp. The cabin wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. I backed away from the doorway, my hands trembling. The fog outside thickened, curling into shapes that weren't natural, twisting tendrils of shadow that seemed to reach for me. My car, the road, everything familiar, had vanished. The cabin had become the center of some other world, a place untethered from reality. I explored the room, desperate to find another exit. There was none. Only the chair, now closer to me, though I hadn't moved it. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting, almost alive. Then I saw it. Faint footprints on the wooden floor, not mine, not human, leading toward a back door I hadn't noticed before. I opened it slowly. Darkness swallowed me, yet I could feel a presence behind me, heavy and patient. A whisper hissed in my ear. "Stay or leave. Your choice is already made." I wanted to scream, but my voice failed. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by a faint scratching sound from the shadows. I realized the cabin wasn't just a building. It was a trap, a living entity, and every instinct screamed that it fed on fear. My only hope was to keep moving, to follow the footprints deeper, praying they might lead to freedom. I stepped through the back door, and the world shifted. The fog thickened into a wall, pressing in from all sides, and the cabin itself seemed to stretch, walls bending and floors tilting. Shadows danced across the warped surfaces, elongating and snapping back like living creatures. I could hear whispers everywhere at once, some pleading, some mocking, all incomprehensible. Ahead, a faint light shimmered, flickering through the fog. I ran toward it, lungs burning, but the floor beneath me seemed to resist each step. The shadows moved faster now, forming humanoid shapes with elongated limbs, circling and guiding me deeper into the cabin's impossible interior. Then I saw them. Other people. Their faces pale, eyes wide, frozen in terror. They hadn't moved in years. Yet here they were, trapped as I was, caught in the cabin's rhythm. One turned slowly toward me, mouth opening, whispering in the same voice I had heard before. "You shouldn't have come." I realized that the cabin wasn't just a place. It was a collector, a predator that harvested curiosity and fear, storing the souls of those who wandered too close. I had become its newest resident, a part of its endless, shifting maze. I forced myself to move forward, following the dim, flickering light deeper into the cabin's endless interior. The walls seemed to bend unnaturally, the floorboards stretching and creaking as if alive. The air smelled of decay and smoke, thick and suffocating, pressing against my lungs with every breath. I could feel unseen eyes tracking my every movement, shadows clinging to me like a second skin. The whispers became clearer now, forming words I could understand. Fear feeds us. Curiosity binds. You belong. My heart pounded, and I stumbled, catching myself on a twisted railing that hadn't been there before. The light flickered again, revealing glimpses of the other trapped souls, some staring blankly, some whispering in panic, all frozen in the cabin's relentless rhythm. Then I saw it. A small, rotting staircase leading down into darkness. Something in me, some survival instinct mixed with morbid curiosity, forced me to descend. Each step groaned, echoing through the hollow space. The shadows followed, stretching with every movement, whispering in unison. I understood then. This cabin didn't just trap the body, it trapped the mind. And every choice I made only pulled me deeper into its design, twisting my reality until I couldn't tell what was real and what belonged to the cabin itself. The basement, or whatever it was, opened into a vast chamber, far larger than the cabin should have contained. Shadows moved along the walls like black water, forming faces, hands, bodies. The whispers became screams, layered and unrelenting, filling the chamber with a chorus of torment. I realized that the cabin had infinite space, shifting and expanding to trap anyone who entered. I could see a faint glow in the center of the chamber. As I approached, the shadows recoiled slightly, forming a corridor of darkness that led straight to it. On a small pedestal, a journal lay open, pages filled with notes from those who had come before me. Hikers, travelers, curious souls, all recording the same story. The cabin waits, it watches, it collects, it teaches. The whispers pressed into my mind. Understand or remain. I read one line, my blood running cold. The cabin chooses who leaves and who it claims forever. Suddenly, I felt cold hands grip my shoulders. I spun around, but there was no one. The shadows swirled, pushing me toward the glow. My instincts screamed to resist. But deep down, I knew that the cabin had already marked me. Escape was no longer just a matter of running. It was a question of survival against a sentient, patient predator. I approached the glowing pedestal with trembling hands. The journal's pages seemed to shimmer, almost alive, the ink rearranging itself as I read. Each word whispered directly into my mind, memories and experiences of those trapped before me. Their fear and desperation imprinted like a psychic residue. The cabin wasn't just a building. It was a sentient collector of souls, learning from every visitor, adapting, becoming stronger. As I read, shadows swirled around me, forming twisted humanoid shapes. Their elongated arms reached toward me, brushing my skin, cold and insistent. I felt the cabin probing, testing, weighing my fear. The whispers became clearer. Do you understand now? Fear is the path. Curiosity is the guide. Submission is safety. I realized I had to play the cabin's game. Panic clawed at my chest, but I forced myself to breathe, to focus. I began speaking aloud, repeating phrases I had read, acknowledging the cabin's power. Slowly, the shadows retreated just enough to allow me space. The glow from the pedestal pulsed, as if approving my obedience. But I knew this wasn't freedom. I had only survived this part. The cabin was patient. It didn't rush. It collected slowly, eternally, and I was only beginning to understand its rules. I stepped back from the pedestal, heart pounding. The shadows receded slightly, but the whispers lingered, flowing through every corner of the chamber like a living entity. I glanced at the walls, faces pressed against them, mouths open in silent screams. Each figure seemed to be trapped in its own memory, frozen yet aware, a warning of what could happen to me. I realized that the cabin thrived on attention. The more I feared, the stronger it became. My survival depended not on escape, but on understanding its rules and respecting them. The glow of the pedestal dimmed as I followed a faint path illuminated by the shadows themselves, leading toward a stairway I hadn't noticed before. Every step felt heavier, the air thickening with whispers and unseen presence. The cabin was patient, eternal, and indifferent to pleas or screams. It only required compliance. I understood now that those who disappeared hadn't resisted. They had failed to learn. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus, to walk steadily, acknowledging the cabin's power while keeping my mind sharp. I had survived this encounter, but the cabin had marked me forever. And I knew one day it would call again. I finally emerged from the cabin, or at least what I believed to be the exit. The fog outside had thickened into an almost tangible wall, but the road had returned. My car was exactly where I had left it, tires slick with wet leaves. I stumbled in, locking the doors, hands shaking, chest heaving. For a moment, I thought I had escaped, but the whispers lingered, faint and insistent, weaving through the hum of the engine. The cabin had marked me. Every rearview glance, every shadow along the roadside reminded me of it. Black Hollow Road stretched endlessly, and I knew the fog could return at any moment to pull me back. I drove fast, ignoring the winding road and my racing heart, hoping to distance myself from whatever force had claimed me. At home, I tried to explain to friends and family, but the words felt hollow. No one believed me. Stress, they said. Overactive imagination. But I knew better. The cabin didn't just trap you. It waited for you, following, lingering, reminding you that curiosity comes at a cost. And I had learned that cost firsthand. Even now, years later, I avoid Black Hollow Road entirely. The whispers still find me sometimes, subtle, teasing, reminding me that it never forgets. Years have passed, yet I remain haunted. Every time I drive past a dark, foggy road, I feel the cabin's presence lurking just beyond perception. Shadows cling to the corners of my vision, and the faint whispers tease me in quiet moments. I understand now that survival isn't escape. It's compliance, awareness, and respect for forces beyond comprehension. I've tried to warn others, but the world is skeptical. They don't see what I saw. They don't hear the whispers. Black Hollow Road is patient, waiting for the curious, the reckless, the unprepared. And I am a living warning, proof of its power. Sometimes, in dreams, I return to the cabin, walking its warped halls, feeling the shadows press close. The journal, the glowing pedestal, the whispers. They are all there, eternal, teaching, waiting for the next visitor. I survived Black Hollow Road, yes, but I am not free. A part of me will always belong to the cabin, marked and remembered. And one day, it will call again, patient and eternal, for another soul to wander into its grasp. I will never forget. The cabin never forgets. My name is Clara James, and this happened during the winter of 2019, when I took a temporary job as a lighthouse keeper on Dead Man's Point, a remote stretch of the Pennsylvania coastline. The locals spoke in hushed tones about the lighthouse, how previous keepers disappeared without explanation, how ships sometimes ran aground, even in clear weather. I dismissed their warnings at first, thinking them nothing more than maritime superstition. The lighthouse itself was ancient, its paint peeling, windows fogged with salt, and the wind constantly howling through its cracks. The cliffs below dropped sharply into the icy ocean, waves crashing with a deafening roar. From the moment I arrived, I felt an uneasy presence, as if unseen eyes were watching my every move. The first night, while climbing the spiral staircase to the top, I noticed scratches along the walls, deep, jagged, as if something had tried to claw its way up from below. Then I heard a faint voice, barely audible over the wind. "You shouldn't be here." I froze. My rational mind tried to reason it away, blaming the wind, the isolation, the echo. But the voice whispered again, closer this time, more urgent. Something about Dead Man's Point wanted to communicate or warn me, and I had no idea how dangerous that attention could be. That first night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the lighthouse, every gust of wind, seemed like footsteps echoing on the metal stairs. I tried keeping a log, but my hand shook too much to write coherently. Shadows shifted across the walls, forming shapes that vanished whenever I looked directly at them. The whispers returned intermittently, sometimes distant, sometimes loud enough to make my heart skip a beat. "Clara, watch the water." I took my duties seriously, checking the light, maintaining the signal. But each task felt heavier, as if the building itself resisted my presence. At one point, I leaned over the balcony to inspect the cliffs, and for a brief moment, I could see figures moving in the waves below. Human shapes, standing upright, motionless, as if observing me. I blinked, and they were gone. I began noticing small details that didn't make sense. Footprints in the dust that didn't match mine, objects slightly moved, the sound of distant footsteps pacing just outside my door. The isolation magnified every noise, every shadow. Dead Man's Point was more than lonely. It was alive in a way I couldn't comprehend, and I had become its focus. The second night was worse. The wind outside became a screaming force, rattling the windows and shaking the metal stairs. I was sitting at the top of the lighthouse, trying to log the day's events, when I saw it. A shadow moving across the balcony, impossibly tall, almost translucent. My first instinct was to call out, but the air seemed to thicken, swallowing my voice. The whispers returned, overlapping, urgent. "Do not ignore. Do not leave." I could feel a weight pressing on my chest, a presence that wasn't human, yet watched me with intelligent curiosity. I leaned over the railing, and below, the cliffs and ocean seemed to writhe in the darkness. Waves rising unnaturally, carrying shapes that disappeared the moment I focused on them. I backed away, stumbling over my own feet. The lighthouse, normally so steady, groaned as if responding to my fear. I tried to rationalize what I was seeing, perhaps hallucinations, perhaps exhaustion. But deep down, I knew it wasn't my mind playing tricks. Dead Man's Point had a history of claiming lives, of driving people to madness. And I had now become part of its story, an unwilling participant in its eternal observation. I decided I had to investigate the lower floors, hoping to find some explanation. The spiral staircase groaned beneath each step, shadows stretching unnaturally, reaching toward me with claw-like shapes. The smell of salt and decay intensified, as if the lighthouse had absorbed years of death and fear. As I reached the maintenance room, I noticed a set of old journals stacked neatly on a shelf. Their covers were water-stained and brittle. But as I opened one, the handwriting struck me with horror. It belonged to a previous keeper, detailing the same experiences: whispers, shadows, visions of the cliffs, strange movements in the ocean, and a feeling of being observed. The last entry ended mid-sentence. "The lighthouse watches, and I..." The final words were scratched out violently. I dropped the journal, and the lights flickered. A shadow coalesced in the corner, humanoid but distorted, towering over me. It didn't move, yet I could feel its gaze boring into my mind. The whispers surged into coherent words. "You are here now. You will keep watch. You belong. I realized then that Dead Man's Point wasn't just haunted, it was a predator, patient and eternal, and I had become its latest keeper. The next morning, I forced myself to descend to the lighthouse base, thinking daylight might lessen the oppressive presence. But even in the weak winter light, the cliffs looked unnatural, too jagged, too steep, almost alive in the way they jutted into the ocean. The waves churned violently, carrying shadows that twisted in ways water should never allow. I tried to call for help, dialing the local harbor office, but the line was dead. Static hissed, followed by faint whispers. Stay. Keep watch. Belong? I froze, realizing the voice was no longer external. It had embedded itself into my thoughts. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet my body refused to obey entirely, moving mechanically as if guided by some unseen force. I explored the base, finding nothing but rusted equipment and the remnants of old journals from keepers long gone. Their words spoke of similar experiences, shadows, whispers, hallucinations, and finally, the feeling of being claimed. The lighthouse didn't just haunt, it possessed, and I was slowly learning the cost of curiosity. By nightfall, the wind had returned, howling like 1,000 voices. I climbed the spiral staircase again, heart pounding, knowing that each step pulled me closer to whatever entity had marked me. I was beginning to understand Dead Man's Point. Too late to escape, too late to resist. By the second night, the presence had grown stronger. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls of the lighthouse, sometimes detaching briefly before coiling back into shape. The whispers now spoke clearly in my mind, recounting memories that weren't mine, previous keepers' fears, mistakes, and final thoughts. The realization hit me. The lighthouse absorbed everything, storing consciousnesses within its walls like a library of torment. I saw movement out the top window. Shapes in the cliffs, figures rising from the ocean spray, faces twisted in eternal panic. I pressed closer, trying to understand, and one figure locked eyes with me. It was impossible. A previous keeper, pale and gaunt, staring directly into my soul. The whispers confirmed it. We are all here. We belong. You will join us. I stumbled backward, crashing into the spiral staircase. The railing seemed alive, writhing, attempting to slow me. My thoughts became entangled with the whispers, threatening to swallow my own identity. Panic turned to obedience as I realized resistance only fueled the lighthouse's attention. Survival depended on submission and understanding the rules of this ancient, sentient predator. Dead Man's Point wasn't just haunted, it claimed. And I had learned, painfully, that it would not release me willingly. The nights became unbearable. The shadows no longer stayed in corners. They moved freely, stretching along walls and ceilings, forming grotesque shapes that mimicked human figures. One evening, I looked down from the top balcony and saw something that made my blood run cold. The ocean itself seemed alive, waves forming faces, mouths opening and closing, as if whispering to me. The lighthouse wasn't just haunted. It was a conduit, a connection between the living and something far darker beneath the cliffs. I tried to leave, but the door slammed shut before my hands could reach it. The whispers surged in my mind, overlapping. You cannot leave. You are ours. You will keep a watch. Panic clawed at me, yet my body moved toward the spiral staircase instinctively. I felt drawn to the top, to the light, as though climbing was not a choice, but a requirement. At the summit, I saw them clearly now. Shadowy forms circling the light, their elongated limbs reaching toward me. One pressed close, its face pale and gaunt, eyes empty, yet knowing everything about me. My rational mind screamed, But the lighthouse's presence had embedded itself into my very being. I was no longer just a keeper. I had become part of its collection, bound by fear, isolation, and the ancient power of Dead Man's Point. Desperation took hold. I clawed at the railing, trying to fight the compulsion to stay. But the shadows pressed closer, whispering secrets and demands into my mind. The beacon's light flickered, casting strange patterns across the spiraling walls. I could feel memories that weren't mine flooding in. Visions of keepers past, of those who had resisted, of those who had succumbed. A sudden roar echoed from the cliffs, the sound more than wind, more than waves. It was alive, a deep, resonant voice that shook the entire lighthouse. The shadows recoiled slightly, but didn't retreat. I understood then that the lighthouse had awareness, a sentience that judged every thought and action, feeding on fear and compliance alike. I forced myself to step closer to the light, speaking aloud, trying to assert some control over my body, my mind. The shadows paused, the whispers softened, and the cold, oppressive weight lifted just enough to allow me to breathe. Survival required balance, acknowledging the lighthouse's power without surrendering entirely. Yet deep down, I knew it had marked me permanently. Dead Man's Point didn't just scare you. It claimed pieces of you, leaving your mind intertwined with its darkness forever. Escape was temporary, illusionary, and the lighthouse waited for those who underestimated its patience. The following morning, exhaustion weighed heavily on me. My body moved mechanically, performing the lighthouse duties that had now become ritual rather than work. The shadows had receded slightly with daylight, but their presence lingered at the edges of my vision, and the whispers still slithered through my thoughts. I realized I could never truly escape Dead Man's Point. It had claimed a piece of my mind, weaving me into its collection. I tried to leave, packing my things and stepping toward the door. But the cliffs outside seemed different, unnaturally steep, as if the lighthouse had reshaped the land around it. Even the road back to civilization appeared distant, obscured by a wall of mist that wasn't there before. It was as though the lighthouse itself determined who could leave and who would stay, its sentience extending beyond its walls into the world outside. I returned to the spiral staircase, a grim acceptance settling over me. The shadows weren't hostile. They were patient observers, waiting for the next mistake, the next lapse in focus. Survival depended on understanding the rules, obeying the rhythm of the lighthouse, and acknowledging its eternal gaze. I had escaped immediate danger, but Dead Man's Point had marked me forever. My nights would never again be mine, my mind never fully my own. Years have passed since my time at Dead Man's Point, yet the lighthouse's presence never fully left me. Sometimes, in dreams or fleeting moments of silence, I hear the whispering, soft, insistent, reminding me that it is always watching. I understand now that the lighthouse doesn't just haunt, it collects, and those who serve as its keepers are never truly free. I've shared my story with friends, with experts, but few believe it. They see only a solitary lighthouse, a lonely keeper, and the ocean beyond. They cannot feel the weight, the whispers, the shadows that follow long after the journey ends. Dead Man's Point is eternal, patient, and it remembers. I am marked, I survived, but I am no longer untouched. Every time I see a lighthouse, every time I hear the crash of waves against cliffs, I feel its pull, the reminder that curiosity comes at a cost. And someday, if I stray too close again, it will call me back, as it calls all those who wander too near. I am a keeper in spirit now, a witness to its power, and I will never forget. Dead Man's Point never forgets either. My name is Ethan Cole, and this happened during the summer of 2018, when I worked as a night security guard at the abandoned Milltown Asylum in Pennsylvania. The asylum had been closed for decades, shuttered after rumors of abuse, mysterious deaths, and unexplained disappearances. Local kids dared each other to sneak in, claiming they heard screams echoing from the halls at night. But no one ever stayed long enough to verify it. I thought I was prepared, that my experience as a security officer would keep fear at bay. The asylum itself was enormous, sprawling across the multiple floors, with peeling paint, broken windows, and rusted iron doors that groaned on their hinges. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay, a constant reminder of the building's dark past. From the moment I stepped inside, I felt eyes watching me, even though I was alone. Every footstep echoed unnaturally, bouncing back from walls as if the asylum itself were amplifying my presence. That first night, I began my rounds, checking each floor, corridor, and empty room. Strange shadows seemed to flit just beyond my vision. Doors would creak open and close on their own, and faint whispers floated through the halls. At first, I dismissed it as wind or my imagination. But something in Milltown Asylum wanted me to know I was not alone. As the night progressed, the atmosphere became heavier, almost suffocating. The walls seemed to pulse, echoing the cries and screams of patients who had long since passed. I moved cautiously down the main hallway, flashlight flickering, and noticed something peculiar. Faint handprints on the dust-covered walls, as if someone or something had been following me silently. A door at the end of the hallway opened slowly, without a sound. I froze, heart racing, as a cold draft swept through the corridor. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, speaking words I couldn't fully understand, but felt deep in my chest. Stay. Don't leave. We're watching. My rational mind told me to ignore it, but every instinct screamed that the asylum itself was alive, feeding on fear, isolating me from the outside world. I checked the surveillance monitors, hoping to see movement captured on camera, but the feeds flickered and distorted. Shadows danced across the screens, mimicking movements that weren't happening in real time. The asylum wasn't merely haunted. It was sentient, aware of my presence, patient and calculating. I had entered its domain, and I knew instinctively that leaving wouldn't be as simple as walking out the front door. As the hours dragged on, I began hearing footsteps echoing in corridors I had just passed, footsteps that didn't match my own. The sound of dragging chains and distant screams made the hair on my neck stand on end. At first, I thought it was other security personnel, but I remembered I was alone. The asylum had a rhythm of its own, a heartbeat that pulsed through the floors and walls, guiding me deeper into its maze of despair. I entered what had once been the patient wards. Beds lay broken and rusted, sheets shredded, and the smell of rot hung heavy. Shadows flickered along the walls, elongating unnaturally, forming shapes that resembled twisted human forms. One figure stood perfectly still in the corner, pale and featureless, watching me. I blinked, and it was gone, leaving behind only the echo of whispers. You shouldn't be here. You don't belong. A sudden noise, metal clanging against the floor, made me jump. The asylum seemed to respond to my fear, the shadows moving faster, closing in. I realized that Milltown Asylum was not just haunted. It thrived on terror, absorbing it and reflecting it back, turning every corner into a trap. My instincts screamed at me to run, But the building had already drawn me into its game, and leaving alive was no longer guaranteed. I decided to explore the old treatment rooms, hoping to find some clue or explanation. The floors creaked under my weight, each step echoing like a gunshot in the empty halls. Inside, medical instruments were scattered, rusted with age, and the walls were stained with water and something darker, something I dared not identify. Shadows danced on the walls, responding to my movement, stretching and twisting unnaturally. As I turned to leave, I noticed a journal lying atop a metal table, dusty but intact. Its pages were filled with entries from previous staff and patients, chronically unexplained deaths, voices, and sightings of figures that shouldn't exist. One passage froze me in my tracks. The asylum sees everything. It knows fear. It chooses who it keeps. The words felt like a direct message to me, chilling in their clarity. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. The temperature dropped sharply, and the whispers surged into my mind, overlapping, repeating, urgent. "Stay, stay, stay." I backed away, heart hammering, realizing the asylum was testing me, measuring my fear, deciding whether I would be the next soul it claimed. I understood then that Milltown Asylum wasn't merely a building. It was a predator, and I was walking willingly into its grasp. By midnight, the asylum's influence had grown stronger. Every corridor I walked down seemed longer than the last, as if the building itself was stretching, warping reality around me. The shadows no longer stayed at the edges. They flowed along the floors, walls, and ceilings like liquid darkness. I could hear whispers in every language, some familiar, some alien, all urgent, all commanding. In the old dining hall, I saw them clearly for the first time. Figures of patients long dead, sitting rigidly at the shattered tables, faces twisted in silent screams. They didn't move, yet I could feel their gaze, accusing, hungry, knowing. I tried speaking aloud, demanding they leave, but the whispers overpowered my voice, echoing inside my skull. "You cannot leave. You belong here." I stumbled back toward the main hallway, my flashlight flickering. The shadows stretched to meet me, pressing against my mind, showing visions of the asylum's past horrors. I saw the faces of previous guards, screaming as they vanished, doors slamming on their own, metal chains dragging across floors. Milltown Asylum didn't just haunt. It possessed, bending perception and will. And I realized the line between the living and the dead, within these walls, had blurred completely. I fled down the hallway, desperate to find the main exit. But the asylum seemed endless. Doors led to rooms I hadn't entered before, hallways curved impossibly, and the walls whispered my name repeatedly. I felt disoriented, as though time had slowed, and the building itself was alive, manipulating my perception to trap me. In one hallway, I came across a mirror. My reflection stared back, but it wasn't mine entirely. It was twisted, pale, and distorted, eyes hollow yet burning with recognition. The whispers became louder, feeding off my terror. "Join us. Stay with us. Forever." I could feel my sense of self slipping, my mind beginning to accept the asylum as reality. I tried to fight, shouting, kicking at walls, throwing objects, anything to regain control. The shadows surged, almost physical now, pressing against me, shaping into hands that seemed ready to pull me into the darkness. But in a moment of clarity, I focused on my goal. Survive, keep moving, resist surrendering entirely. I knew that yielding would mean I would never leave Milltown Asylum alive or sane. The building was patient, but I had learned that patience alone could be beaten with determination. I had to escape before it fully consumed me. By the early hours of the morning, exhaustion and fear had fused into something heavier, almost tangible. Every room I entered now felt alive, pulsing with energy I couldn't explain. The whispers were constant, circling my mind, repeating fragments. You cannot leave. Stay. Belong. My flashlight flickered, casting shadows that stretched into grotesque shapes, moving independently as though mocking my attempts to assert control. In the old therapy room, I saw them, former patients standing in a semicircle, faces twisted in expressions of pain and rage. They were silent, yet I felt their intent. A focused pressure in my chest that made breathing difficult. I stumbled backward, hitting a wall, and the shadows surged toward me. The floorboards groaned as if alive, bending beneath me, and the temperature dropped suddenly, icy mist curling along the hallway. I realized then that the asylum didn't just trap bodies, it trapped minds, twisting perception until reality was impossible to distinguish from the hallucinations it projected. Every corner held a memory of terror, every shadow a previous soul it had ensnared. I knew with certainty that Milltown Asylum wasn't going to let me leave easily. To survive, I had to navigate both the physical building and the labyrinth of my own mounting terror. I pressed forward, trying to find the main exit, but the asylum refused to comply. Hallways shifted as I walked, rooms rearranging themselves subtly, but enough to disorient me. The whispers became coherent sentences, taunting and instructing at once. You are ours. You cannot leave. Remember. The line between reality and illusion blurred completely, and I questioned whether I had ever truly entered the asylum or if it had pulled me into another plane entirely. In the grand lobby, I saw the origin of it all. A swirling vortex of shadow and light in the center of the room, like the combined memories, fears, and souls of everyone the asylum had claimed. The shadows reached for me, but the light in the vortex pulsed with a strange rhythm, almost beckoning. I hesitated, knowing that stepping closer could either be salvation or doom. My mind screamed to turn back, yet something compelled me forward. The shadows whispered my deepest fears, twisting them into visions of failure, death, and eternal imprisonment. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to focus on a single truth. I had to survive. The asylum could manipulate perception, warp reality, and terrify endlessly. But it could not strip away determination if I refused to yield. As I approached the swirling vortex, my mind raced with panic and resolve. The shadows clawed at my vision, forming grotesque shapes that mimicked people I knew. Friends, family, even strangers I'd passed in life, twisting them into horrifying parodies. The whispers grew deafening, overlapping into a cacophony that threatened to erase my identity. Stay. Join us. Never leave. I stumbled backward, tripping over debris, and the vortex pulsed, sending waves of energy that blurred the walls, floor, and ceiling. The ghostly figures of former patients reached for me, fingers barely grazing my skin, yet leaving a cold, paralyzing weight on my chest. Every step forward was agony. Every breath a struggle against the oppressive force that seemed to feed on my fear. But then I remembered one thing from my training: focus. I forced my mind onto a single point, the main exit, the reality beyond this building. As I concentrated, the shadows wavered slightly, and the whispers faltered. I realized that Milltown Asylum could manipulate perception, twist reality, but it could not entirely dominate a mind that refused to submit. With slow, deliberate steps, I moved toward the exit, ignoring the visions and the whispers, clinging to the one truth that might save me: survival. I burst through the asylum's front doors as the first hints of dawn appeared, the cold morning air slicing through the darkness and the oppressive energy inside. The vortex and shadows didn't follow, but I could still feel their presence lingering, etched into my mind. The whispers were gone, replaced by the echo of my own ragged breathing and pounding heartbeat. I stumbled across the overgrown lawn, never daring to look back, and the first rays of sunlight felt like a shield against the building's reach. Even now, years later, I am haunted by Milltown Asylum. Sometimes, in dreams, I hear the whispers, see the shadows, feel the pull of the vortex. The building didn't release me entirely. It left a fragment of itself inside my mind, a reminder that the asylum never truly forgets. Curiosity and duty brought me there, but only sheer will saved me. I know others have entered since, and some may not leave at all. Milltown Asylum is patient, intelligent, and relentless. It waits for the next visitor, the next soul willing to explore its haunted halls, and it will not stop until it has claimed every mind it can touch. I survived, but I am forever changed. As the sun rises over the quiet towns of Pennsylvania, the darkness we explored tonight lingers in the shadows of abandoned streets, empty homes, and forgotten places. 7 lives have crossed paths with terror in ways that ordinary people cannot imagine. Yet these stories are not fiction. They are real, documented encounters from those brave enough to share their experiences. From isolated lighthouses to haunted asylums, from shadowed forests to sinister rural homes, these tales remind us that danger often hides where help cannot reach, feeding on fear, curiosity, and the unknown. The shadows may recede with daylight, but the echoes of the past, the whispers in the night, and the creatures that dwell beyond our understanding remain, patient and waiting. Remember, these stories are a warning as much as they are a testament to human courage. Stay vigilant, respect the darkness, and never underestimate what hides in the corners of small towns and forgotten places. Thanks for watching. This was Dark Fears.